let's talk about identity. So what's the first word that comes to mind when I say identity? For some people, it may be meta-system, could be claims, could be security. But certainly from my past experience, for a lot of people, the word association with identity is pain. Pain both as a user and as a developer. It can get really hard to keep control of all these accounts that you have and remember all the passwords and deal with all that stuff as a user. As a developer, there's obviously a lot of complexity there as well. There's all things like certificates, encryption algorithms, key exchange. There's so much to think about there. And really, as a developer, in a lot of cases, what we want to do is use identity as an enabler, use it to enhance our application by things like personalization. But really, the identity itself is not the end goal. So for a lot of developers, and I've certainly been in this situation, I really want the identity part to be simple, to be easy, so I can get on with the real job, which is writing, business logic, business code. So let's take a look at what we can do about this. Just to introduce myself, my name is Jörn Tallien. I'm on the Windows Live ID team at Microsoft. We're a part of the Live Services organization. And my mission in life is to handle a lot of this complexity for you. My particular focus is on developer APIs, and I want to make it as simple as possible for you to integrate with our identity technology so that you can get on with the job that you get paid for. So let's just provide some context of what we're talking about at PDC about identity. There's a lot of different facets to this, and you've probably seen some of these sessions already. The sessions that we're going to focus on, or the parts that we're going to focus on, are these. The Live Identity Services service, the Live Framework software, and the Microsoft Federation Gateway. Now, one theme that's, a few themes that are underlying all this: standards, productivity, and choice. And we're trying to be good citizens and give you solutions that enable you to focus on all of these things without you having to have your brain explode. We've got a pretty packed agenda. This is what we're going to try to look at, and I'm hoping we won't get any messy brain explosions on the floor. There's a lot of stuff to cover there. We'll do our best to get through it. We should be able to manage it. Just want to start by some of the principles that we work to in our organization. First of all, ease of use is very important, both on the user side and the developer side. We're also find standards and openness very important. No longer can we be an island. No longer can any identity system be an island. We want to provide rich functionality. We want to support a range of scenarios, including personal and business. We want to be federation ready, which you probably heard something about in yesterday's keynote. But most of all, security is our top priority. As I mentioned, my goal is to try and look after that part so that you can use this technology and sleep at night. So before we get into any deep dive, let's just do a little conceptual orientation. I'm going to present for you here what I think are the key steps to identity integration. I find this a very useful model. I think you will as well. I've called it the APPZ or APPZ, depending on where you come from. Call it apps if you want. The first A is for authentication. And again, at each of these stages, we have a lot of choices. We have choices of authentication protocol, choices of principal types, lots of choices there. But ultimately, it's about finding out who is the person that we're dealing with, who is the entity that we're dealing with. The second one is P for policy. Now, the next step here is we found out through some protocol who this person is or who this entity is. We then have to make a number of decisions based on that. Do we trust the person whose identity has been asserted? Do we trust the identity provider that is telling us that is the case? We have a lot of choices as well about how we handle tokens. Do we cache them? Do we allow users to store them in a cookie? How long do we require refresh? Is it every 6 hours? Is it every 2 weeks? There's lots of choices that we have to make as application developers. And a lot of these policy things, they can't be covered by toolkits or infrastructure. There's certainly some best practices, but ultimately, you have to make the decision here. The second P is for profile. Again, if we're dealing with users, they've told us that they're person 1, 2, 3. But maybe in our application, we want more information than that. Maybe you want to know, just to be friendly, first name and last name. Maybe you want email address so we can send them reminders when they don't come back to our site. Maybe you want to know what gender they are so we can offer more targeted features. Maybe you want to know what age they are so that we can make sure that we comply with any laws that affect our sites. This really is, in many ways, is a separate step. Again, there's lots of decisions about how we do this, including account registration, and obviously in ASP.NET, you would typically store that and link to that as the membership system. The best practice in this area is really what I would call profile accrual, which at the simplest means only ask for the information you need and don't put extra barriers in front of the user. So to give you an example, if I'm browsing for a book or a gift, I really don't want to have to give this site my email address, my first name and last name. I just want to browse the site and see what they have. Now, maybe when I add a book to my shopping cart, at that point, they may want to identify me so that when I come back, they can restart where I left off. So at that point, they'd need some identification information. But really, there's not much else they need apart from a claim to say who I am, who my identity provider says. They don't really need first name, last name, email address. Now, obviously, some sites will claim they will, and that's a very healthy discussion that can be had over a beer one time. But in reality, again, don't put extra burdens in front of the user. It'll make them stop. Obviously, once you buy a book, once you buy a gift, then there's some extra information that's needed at that point. Credit card information to pay for it, shipping address so you can be sent for it. But it's really only at that point that I want to provide that level of information. I don't really want to have a huge registration screen that I have to fill in just to look for a book on this site. So again, there's a lot of choices we have to make around profile. The last area is Z for authorization. Once we know who this user is, once we've collected whatever information our application needs, we then have to work out what are they allowed to do. So if we're a B2B portal, for example, is this a manager that's allowed to approve purchase orders? Or is this a buyer that's allowed to enter purchase orders? And again, a lot of the familiar concepts come into play here. Claims, obviously. We've heard a lot about those in the last few days, and we'll hear some more in the next few, I think. Roles, and access control. Now, that's, in my view, is a good model to allow us to easily integrate with identity technology. So, let's take a look at how we can do that. I was actually going to save this section to the end, but this was announced yesterday around noon in Kim Cameron's talk, and there's been so much interest and so much buzz on the internet about this announcement that I thought, let's get it done. Let's talk about it right up front. So I'm very happy to announce that Windows Live ID is becoming an OpenID provider. We are, thank you. We are committing to support that protocol for our users. So what does that mean? Well, we're the identity provider for Microsoft, so that basically means Microsoft is supporting OpenID. What that means to users, though, is that they can use their Live ID account to sign into OpenID-enabled websites anywhere on the internet. It means they don't have to create extra accounts, extra usernames, extra passwords, just to sign in and identify themselves to a site. Now, obviously, the site may then want to go beyond that and collect like profile information or purchase information, but to simply identify themselves, to authenticate, this is one of the options. They don't have to create lots of extra usernames. We'll look in a short while at some of the implementation details. I just want to call out a couple of things. Firstly, we allow you to create an alias and add an OpenID alias to your account. We're particularly trying to make sure that obviously you have a choice there. You can choose what alias you want on a first-come, first-served basis. But we also want to make sure that we're not going down the path where malicious websites can ask you to sign in with your regular Live ID. So we're trying to keep these things separate for a lot of reasons. We also want to respect that there are some people who have grave concerns about privacy or privacy. So some people are quite happy to give one global identifier to every site they visit. Some people are definitely not happy with that. And so we're trying to support both of those viewpoints. So we give the option, you can either provide your public identifier, or you can provide a private identifier that's scoped to that site. Now, we're obviously waiting for feedback on this, and we'll see what the interest is, but let's say that's what we're trying to do. Put up some next steps here that you can follow after the event. But basically, you have to register an OpenID alias, and then you can use that at any website. So why don't we take a look at that right now? So let me see, what is my favorite website? Not Flickr. Where shall we go to? Flickr's for another demo. Let's go to PIB. PIB is a sort of wiki community site. It allows you to sign in with an OpenID. So I click the sign in button here, and it gives me a number of options. So I can sign in with an OpenID. Now at this point, I've already registered an OpenID for myself, an OpenID alias. So I can just type in my identity provider address, openid.live-int.com. Now, just to point out, this OpenID provider is currently in a CTP status, Community Technology Preview status. It's primarily intended for testing and interop exercises at this stage. We will be releasing to production sometime in 2009, but we very much want to go through the process with the rest of the industry to make sure that our implementation is interoperable. So this is in our integration environment. It's not connected to our production accounts. Okay, so let us authenticate. So here I'm presented with a sign-in screen. This is the Live ID sign-in screen, and it's pre-filled in my alias. This is the last alias that I used, but I can actually change that if I wish, if I have a number of aliases, or I can use that. So let me just sign in there. And I'm then given the choice of which identifier do I want to send back to the site. So I can either send a public identifier, which is basically globally, uniquely identifying me, or I can send an anonymous identifier. Obviously, you can tell from that, that's what's written on my business card. Not quite. Everybody should have a GUID to identify themselves, I think. So I can select which alias to send back, and there I am. I am signed in. And they always want to install extras, don't they? So there you can see, it's identified me, and that's all it knows about me. Just that URL. So the whole basis of OpenID is for me to prove that that URL relates to me. That is my identification URL. And that's all the information that site has about me. Which, you know, if you're concerned about privacy, that's exactly what you want. If you're happy to involve in a deeper relationship, then obviously you can fill out lots of profile information and whatever information the site would like. But ultimately, I've identified myself, and now I can personalize this website based on my own preferences. So that's really what OpenID is all about. It's about how do I present a URL that I can prove that I own or is related to me. So we've just seen a demo. Let's take a look what's actually happening under the covers. Now the good news for all those programmers out there that really don't like writing identity code is the libraries handle all this for you. There's a lot of libraries out there that handle OpenID for a number of different languages. But what you have, you can see here, there's some information about me, there's some information about the site I'm signing into, and there's some continuity information that will be sent back to the website when I return. So when I return, it sends back an assertion that says, basically, I've proved that that URL identifies me, and the identity provider has signed this message to say that it guarantees that. And you can see the way the return URL has round-tripped as well. So again, this can have a good integration with the website. I can pop out, identify myself, and pop right back into the context if the site is based on that process. So I can identify where I go to. The site can then restart me right back into whatever I was doing. Now, obviously, there's a lot of complexity here. I don't really want to go into a lot of detail at this point. It's all covered in the spec. The important thing is really that the implementation we're trying to do, it supports all parts of the OpenID 2.0 specification, all the mandatory parts, and we think it covers all the optional parts. The only thing it doesn't cover at the moment is profile exchange or attribute exchange. We're still having discussions with our privacy and legal teams around what we can do there, so watch this space. So what we've seen there is OpenID. Now, we also have a lot of integration opportunities with Windows Live ID as well and the live identity services. So why would you choose Live ID integration instead of OpenID integration? With OpenID integration, your site can accept sign-ins from any OpenID provider. Can accept sign-ins from Microsoft users, from Google users, from Yahoo users, and there's a whole range of different identity providers out there. So why would you even think about integrating with Live ID directly? The simple answer is user experience. One of the problems with OpenID that is inherent in the fact that there are multiple identity providers is if you support that, you're signing up to the fact that your users will have a varied experience depending on where their identity provider is. Now, that may be okay for your site, but some websites, they want to provide a very immersive experience. And so, for that, they really need to have a much closer integration with specific identity providers. And so we do support that. We have a range of integration SDKs, which we'll look at in some detail in a second. So we have web authentication, which is our equivalent of OpenID. We also have delegation, and we'll talk about that later on. We also have client integration, client SDK. We also have some ASP.NET tools, again, to try and make this simple. Now, I just want to call out a couple of things on this slide. Firstly, our web application SDKs. We support a number of different programming languages, a number of different platforms. We actually release in 7 different languages: C#, Visual Basic, Java, Perl, PHP, Ruby, and Python. Now, there's an important addition to this list that you may not have noticed. Originally, we didn't have VB support. I'm very happy to announce that we now support VB as a first-class language alongside C#. I know we've had a lot of flack for that, but again, we're trying to do the right thing here. But if you want to run your website on any operating system, on Linux, using Python, or Windows using Perl, again, you have the choice there. The choice is entirely up to you. All the integration happens through standard protocols. So you could actually write integration libraries for any programming language that you wanted. But again, based on the principle of software plus services, we're trying to make it simple for you to drop in integration with identity. Moving on then, we talked about rich integration as one of the goals. We actually support in Live ID a number of different principal types. In OpenID, the principal type is a URL. We support users, applications, and devices. And if you've had any experience playing with the mesh, the live mesh, all of that technology has been used under the covers there. So you can have applications that plug into the mesh. You can obviously have your devices plugged into the mesh, and you have user authentication as well to identify your particular part of that mesh. There are also opportunities for applications acting on behalf of a user. So if I go to a social networking website, for example, I may want them to go and access my address book, pull out all my contact records, and search for my friends that already exist on there. There are 2 key ways to do that. One is called delegation, which is primarily about the application has to get my permission to do that, and I don't give my password out to that application. The bad way of doing that is impersonation. I type in my username, I type in my password at that website, and it can access my account on my behalf. Now, it gives it full access to my account. So if my account is linked to not just contacts, but email, to wallet services, to medical records, then by giving my username and password out to that site, I give them complete access to everything. That is a very bad problem. It's actually called the password anti-pattern, and it has a good name like that for a reason. It really is the sort of thing you should avoid doing as an application developer. And we'll look at some examples of how we can do constrained delegation later on. We also support a number of credential types. Passwords, obviously the normal thing, but we also allow the site to specify that they only accept strong passwords. So no more people with the password of password would be able to get in. We support smart cards, we support card space, and we have a policy-driven approach. So a site can specify this is the requirements for people to sign into my website. Now our goal is to support all those credential types through all the different channels that we support. The OpenID CTP that you saw earlier on, we currently only support passwords. We will be adding support for all the other credential types that LiveID supports in our final release. It's just a matter of time and getting the stuff done. We have a number of different users types as well. And you've probably heard some of these discussions already, particularly federation and federated domains is becoming a really important part of the identity business. But we also support regular accounts like Hotmail accounts, or even just accounts that simply have an email address. Okay, so we saw OpenID. Let us take a look at web authentication. So this is the, if you like, the way that Microsoft, or the way you can integrate with Microsoft's user base. So I'm going to create, I'm going to create a new project just to try and show you how easy it is to do this. So I'm going to create a new web cloud application. This is the Azure Service Platform. This is the development environment that I'm going to be using. So I've created a skeleton application there. I'm just going to do a few simple things to customize this. Firstly, I'm going to set the port because I've already configured some metadata that's important for this scenario. I'm going to copy that in now. Let's see how fast we can do this. Oops. Let us try that again. There we go. Okay, so we've got some config information in there. I'm going to save that as well. And we've currently got a very blank web page. So there's two things I'm going to do to make this work. First thing is I'm going to drag and drop the script manager. That's a requirement. And then I'm going to drag and drop one of these ASP.NET controls. These are part of the Windows Live toolset. Again, this is part of the Live framework software that we want to encourage you to use to make it easy to integrate with this. So the last thing I'm going to do, just to make sure that we can actually see what's happening, is drop a login view control. This is an extension of the ASP.NET version. It supports LiveID as well. So I'm just going to flick back to my source code here and drop in this guy. Where are we at? Let's pick out the user ID that we signed in with. So I've dragged and dropped two controls and a third one just to actually see what's happening. And that's it. I can now authenticate to my website. Let's give that a bash, see what happens. So what's happening now is it's starting the Azure development environment, the dev fabric on my machine. it's uploading that web application to the dev fabric there, and it's now running in the dev fabric. It's running on my local machine, but I've got this little control here. I can click that, sign in, and it's identified me. Again, very similar to the way OpenID works. And that at the basis is what all web authentication protocols are all about. Now, that's a really sucky UI, to be honest. It's just some text and a link. Gosh, I mean, you could do that from the first time you ever wrote anything. So what we've done is we've added some extra options. I should really add some quotes around this just to be super friendly. Previously, we only had a text version of this. We've now added 2 extra controls that allow you to provide much more pleasant integration, let me say. It matches the experience that users have seen on other sites. So here we have a new control that presents me with the standard Live ID sign-in button. And I can do exactly the same thing, sign in, and there we go. We think this will really help user experience in general, because a lot of the usability research that we've done shows that for a lot of users, particularly the non-technical users, they actually need some level of familiarity. They need to understand what they are supposed to do. So standard icons is a great way for that to happen. It gives them a point of reference. I'm just going to very quickly run through what happened here. A user went to the Reliant Party website, redirected to the Live ID service, entered their password, redirected back, and finally the website returned with some quotes, personalized content. It actually told me what identifier I was signed in with, but hey, it's a start. So that, at its simplest, is a web authentication protocol. OpenID is a very similar protocol. But as we've seen, with ASP.NET integration, we can actually make this really simple. This is what a typical ASP.NET control looks like in the source code. So I'm not going to go into detail here. Just to point out, we have all the standard things, like you can hook into the event system, so you get notified when users sign in and sign out and do whatever you want to do there. What happens behind the scenes is it generates an iframe for the control. And it pulls in the control that's hosted on the Live ID web servers. Previously, it was only one control, that really sucky text control. It did allow customization. You could set colors and font styles and all that kind of stuff, which was, reasonably good. But it didn't go far enough for a lot of people that wanted to have a good user experience for their users. So what we've added is 2 new controls. You can either have the logo control, which has the text plus the little arrow logo, or you can have the full sign-in button itself. A lot of sites have been asking for that, again, for the familiarization. I can talk a little bit here about the request that we send. It's actually a lot simpler than the OpenID. It's basically optimized for this scenario, which is useful if you can do that. Obviously, OpenID can't because it's trying to be a much more general protocol. Interesting point here is I include the application ID, but there's no encryption, there's no signatures involved in that method. So it's really lightweight for the application, the web application, to integrate with this. How does this work then? Well, behind the scenes, I've registered an app ID, and I've registered a return address that's linked to that app ID. And the way this works is, if you tell me that you're this app ID, we will only send tokens back to the registered address. So we have some level of security there that people can't steal tokens. When it comes back, then we give a token with some information that can be decrypted for that website. This is all using shared secrets. So again, it's a fairly lightweight approach to integration. There's no certificate management. There's no complex public-private key stuff. It's pretty easy to write in any programming language. But we've got a little bit better experience there. But that's not good enough for a lot of web design shops in particular. They would really like to have an experience that was totally immersive, that didn't even look like you were going to a live ID screen. So what we have, let me pull up this next demonstration here. What we've done is we've added some customization features to the sign-in screen. Now, this is not yet available as in its final form, but it is available as a tech preview. So let me just run this application, and you can see the difference it makes. So here we have a fairly typical web page. Obviously, the graphics designers have done a good job to make this look pretty, and it's very fancy, a lot better than my graphics experience. But let me click on this link. I've just gone from a really well-themed green site with lots of nice colors to this glaring white page. Now, that's kind of a bit jarring for a lot of users. So let me go to change a little config setting. And what we can do now is we can actually, I've got an application ID that's pre-configured with this information. So let me run that now and see if we can make that experience much more seamless. So here we are back in the start page. You can see, very nice green color. I go to the sign-in screen here, and you can see there's a lot of similarity there. There's a lot of background colors that are carried through, the logos carried through. The description of what the user is actually trying to do has also been carried through. And again, from our user experience research, we've found that this can be a real blocker to a lot of sites. People click on the link, they kind of maybe go have a cup of tea, come back to this, and they suddenly they're presented with this login screen, and what was I trying to do? Why was I logging into this site? And so this kind of customization allows a site to provide a much more seamless experience and a much more context-rich experience. You can see that there's like a value proposition down the side of why I should get involved in the AdventureWorks resort site. And so I can sign in again, just as normal. Oops, type the right password. There we go. And it's returned me straight back. Obviously, the controls have changed. The context links here have changed, so I can access my profile, my friends, all that kind of stuff. But it's a very seamless experience. I went from a green screen to a green screen, back to a green screen. And for a lot of web design shops in particular, people writing high-end web applications, this is really important. This is the most requested feature we've had for web authentication since we launched it. So we think there's going to be a lot of interest in this. So I want to talk a little bit about how this customization works. Again, from our user experience testing, we know that there has to be some frame of reference for users. But also there has to be some customization. So we've divided the screen up into two parts. One way you can customize the contents as a website. You can provide your own logo. You can provide your own statement of what the user's trying to do here. You can provide your own content description. But there's also a section, the blue section, that is standard. The contents are standard. The user can understand what they're being asked to do because there's a consistency across different websites. There's still some customization options. Again, colors in particular, to allow things to blend in. But again, we found that users need this level of familiarity. And so we've tried to balance up the two parts. Obviously, every partner site wants to customize completely everything, but we have to balance that against the usability aspect. Now, I don't expect you to read this. I just want to give you an example of how this configuration looks like. It's basically an XML file where you can specify the various values for the different customization options. You can specify a logo file. You can specify all the different text. It operates through, if you like, a string table. You can provide different strings for different locales. You can even provide different logos. So if internationalization is a concern, again, we've tried to support that right from the start. So that's something we're going to be releasing fairly soon. You should watch the Live ID team blog for more information about that. Just to give you a little pointer of where we think we're trying to go with this as well, though. Identity is really about, in a lot of cases, about the experience. We talked about profile collection. And so we're experimenting with ways that, again, we can integrate that experience. So this is a standard sign-up screen that we have. And the users asked for various bits of information. We have a number of different options of how we can customize that for different sites. Maybe some sites don't need all the parts to this. Maybe they don't actually need all the profile information. Maybe they don't want a CAPTCHA to be presented to their users. Maybe they just want the bare minimum sign-up information, but in a customized, themed, branded way. Now, this is not something that's going to be imminently released. We're still kind of playing around with this. But I just want to give you a feel of the direction we're trying to head in. Again, to simplify the experience of both the users and the developers. The way we're doing this at the moment is we're starting to use this for all our internal sign-up screens for all the different teams at Microsoft. We'll learn a lot from that, and it'll help us to know what level of functionality we have to present. So this is kind of a far out there direction that we're heading in. It's not going to be available immediately. But again, just to give you a feel of the sort of things we're trying to head towards. Okay, so we've covered authentication. We've talked about the difference between user experiences that may or may not be important for your website. But there's another important reason that you might want to integrate with the live services and live framework. We have a lot of users. We have, I think the current number is about 460 million users. Those users have a lot of user data stored in our system. A lot of contacts, a lot of emails, a lot of blog posts. There's a lot of content there. And so we want to provide a way to enable data portability, sharing of that information, but under the control of the user. So this is how this is a scheme that we have at the moment. It's called delegated authentication, or DelAuth for short. If you're a website, you want to access users' information, say their contacts. You have to send the user to a consent screen and ask them, are they okay to release that information to this website? Let's assume they say they're okay with that. the website gets back a consent token. That's basically a special token that allows them to retrieve the data that the user has specified. When they want to use it, they can send it back to the live services cloud, and they can retrieve that information. So if they want to talk to live contacts, they send that token, and that then proves that they have permission from the user to access this data. And they get the data back. So let me just show you how that works. This is where I will go back to our friends at Flickr. So Flickr is obviously a photo sharing website. So I'm going to sign into Flickr with my Flickr account. I still have several accounts. We're working on that one. There we go. And you see here the site is presenting me with the option of a policy choice. Do I want to allow this site to keep me signed in for 2 weeks? Let me try that one again. That's the problem. When you have so many accounts, you have so many passwords. And hopefully they're all different, but maybe not. So here I am into my Flickr account. I maybe want to see which of my friends are already on Flickr so I can share my photos with them. So I can select the Windows Live Hotmail sharing option, and I'm sent back to a Live ID sign-in. So this is not presenting my password to Flickr. This is presenting it to my identity provider. So let me sign in there. And I'm asked the question, do I want to release my information to Flickr? What information is that? It's my live contacts and read access. And I can also choose a duration. Do I want to give them access for a week, a month, or 1 day? So if I send that, I've now given permission for Flickr to access my accounts. What it's done is it's got that token. It's talked to the contact service behind the scenes. It's retrieved all my accounts, all my contact records. It's done a search on its user database and found, well, actually, none of my friends are on Flickr. But I can invite them to join. Like all good social networking sites, keep the ball moving. So it presents me with the information, the names and email addresses of the people that are on my contacts list. And I can obviously then send this, invite them, hook up with them, whatever. But at no point did I send my password into Flickr. I gave out, or Live ID gave out on my behalf, a constrained delegation token. Only for my contacts, only for read access, and only for 1 day. Now, obviously, if I give consent for a whole month, then that's quite a long period. The token that we send back contains two things. It contains a delegation token, which is short-lived. It contains a consent token, which is long-lived. So if you use the delegation token within a couple of hours, then that's fine. But if you want to come back next week and reuse that token, it won't be valid. So we also give websites the option of refreshing that token for the duration of the period that I have given consent. And so they send it to our delegation service, they send the refresh token, and they get back a new token that they can use. At any point, I can go back into the system and revoke consent for that site. I am the user, and I'm always in control. It's my data. Live ID is working on my behalf to try and keep that release of that data safe, but it's ultimately my data. I'm going to skip through this. I think we've talked about most of it. It's a constrained delegation, specific to one website, specific to a set of actions. You can check the slides later if you want, because we're actually running a little bit out of time. If you're interested, this is what the token data looks like. Again, the important thing here is the SDK libraries handle this all for you. You don't have to code to this API. You can code to a .NET API or a Java API or a Perl API or a Python API. Whatever programming language you're comfortable with. We've talked a lot about different ways of accessing user data from the live services. We've talked a lot about different options for authentication. Just want to try and pull this together with some things that were discussed yesterday in the keynote. Federation, federated authentication. We're finding it's an increasingly important part of a lot of app developers' lives. If you want to access 460 million live ID users, then there's ways to do that. But now, with things like the Microsoft Federation Gateway and the Microsoft Services Connector, we can add on a whole range of users that could potentially be accessing your site, your application. We think there's a lot of opportunity there for developers, a lot of opportunity for ISVs. Suddenly, it's opening up basically the whole web, the whole identity ecosystem. All based on standards, all based on open principles, and all trying to be based on ease of use. So how does this work? Really, we were looking to provide the glue, but again, it's all based on standards. There's nothing proprietary in this. We're just trying to hook up the pieces for you. There are three parties involved in this relationship. There's the identity provider, who authenticates their users and holds their user accounts. There's a relying party, which could be your application, your website, that wants to have those users access it. Normally, what that would mean is you'd have to set up a lot of point-to-point relationships. If you have 4 different companies that you sell your services to, that's 4 different federation configurations that you would have to set up. So if we place in the middle a federation provider or federation gateway, again, it can simplify that whole process. It allows identity providers to seamlessly integrate together, but still they have control. Let's take a quick look at how that works in practice. So we have, in this case, a client application. It could be a web application, but it also works for smart clients. We also have an identity provider. So this could be my company's Active Directory. This is where my account is actually stored. Now, obviously, I can authenticate to that, either with things like username, password, or smart cards. There's a whole range of options. But this is the identity provider that knows who I am and is able to assert that to others. It can give me back an identity provider token, which again is based on WS Federation, WS Trust, SAML standards. The application can then send that to the Microsoft Federation Gateway, and it can receive back a service token. A service token that again is scoped to access the application or service that the user wants to. There's various checks that can be built in at this point. Maybe there's policy information that organizations maybe want to apply to say, well, actually, you can authenticate my users to CRM Online, but not a dating website, for example. Again, trying to place the organization that owns those users in control. If I've got the service token back, then the application can now send that to the relying party service, and that can authenticate me. The relying party has no direct relationship with the identity provider in this case. There's a relationship, a one-to-one relationship between the relying party and the federation gateway, and another one between the identity provider and the federation gateway. It's all based on a hub and spoke model. And I would suggest to you this is the only model that will scale to internet dimensions. If you want to try and set up individual point-to-point federation relationships with every company that you deal with, then maybe you have a few big ones. That's okay. Maybe you have lots of small customers. That could get a real big problem. So this is really trying to, again, bridge that gap and make it simple. We're just about coming up on time, so let us try and summarize what we've talked about. We've talked about a lot, and I realize that some of this probably hasn't gone down to the level of detail that you would like. This is a huge subject. I could talk about probably every one of these for a whole hour at least. That's kind of the depth of identity that's technology that's there. And the real answer is, of course, it depends. Like every good consultant, the answer is, it depends. A lot of the choices of what technology you use will depend on exactly what scenario you have or exactly what situation you're dealing with. But we've looked at some of the pain of identity integration and how easy that can be. The goal for my team in particular is how do we make that as simple as drag and drop of a control. There's a lot of complexity happening under the covers, but I say my goal is that we handle that so that you can sleep at night. We've talked about customization and user experience. And again, that is a really important thing. Identity can be a barrier if it's not done properly. What we want is for identity to be an enabler so that you can get on selling your services, selling your applications, and you have access to the user base that is important to you. We've talked about federation. We've talked about some emerging standards like OpenID. And so we're very committed to our core principles. Ease of use is definitely one of the goals and also one of the big challenges. But also we want to provide that based on standards across a variety of scenarios and very much towards federation. But security is always our top priority. That's what keeps us up at night. Now, what are we doing in the future? We've seen a little bit of a glimpse of that in some of these slides and some of the sessions in the last 2 days and the next 2. But again, the goal is ease of use for users and developers. How can we make this as simple as possible, but still respect the choices that you have to make in your application and that you should be making in your application? We're looking to support more standards and provide more open integration. But as always, we'll never let up on security. So that is what keeps us up at night so that you don't have to. With that, I would like to hand it over to question and answers. So if anyone has any questions, there's a microphone in the room. Please go up to the microphone and we'll see what your question is. Bearing in mind that every question you ask keeps you a few minutes away from the party. Not to encourage you.
Thanks.
Bit of peer pressure there.
That was a really good presentation. Just one question regarding the federation. Okay. How about this? I can federate into Live ID, being the hub, and then you'll federate me out to the actual partner site again, right?
Yep.
How about I use, for example, my Google account and then federate into Live ID and then federate from there to somewhere else? Have you guys thought about that?
we've thought about it in the sense that we've decided that that's not our immediate priority.
That's a good
You're
one.
welcome to have a Google account. We think Live ID accounts are better, but the choice is yours.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to sort of...
Or others, because, I mean, everybody has a Yahoo account, plus a Gmail account, plus a Live ID account, plus, I'm probably forgetting one or two. It's the same thing with OpenID, right? It's great to be an identity provider, but that's not really so interesting because everybody is an identity provider.
Yep.
Where can you actually use it apart from blogs?
So really the answer to, so the question is really comes down to what about other identity providers? And in this presentation, I've presented two parts of a picture. One is Live ID as an identity provider, and one is Microsoft as a federation broker. Now, certainly in Live ID, we have user accounts, and you can use your account there. But as a federation gateway, federation provider, we can federate with anyone that supports the standards that we support. So WS Federation, WS Trust, SAML tokens, any identity provider that supports those can come into the ecosystem. So there's a lot of universities, for example, that they run their identity systems on Shibboleth. They can federate into that overall federation ecosystem as well. You don't have to have a Live ID account to do that. It's all about, can we interoperate on the standard protocols? Anyone that can talk those standard protocols can integrate into the ecosystem. Okay, next question.
I think I saw on your slides something mentioning Silverlight and integration with Live ID directly. Will there ever be a day when we can directly authenticate from within a Silverlight control?
That is certainly one of the things we're looking at. There's a lot of different environments that we haven't quite got the same level of functionality as we had in some of the others, particularly the web. So Silverlight is one that we're definitely working on. Mobile is another. And again, we're trying to bring the level of functionality we support in those areas up to the same kind of level that we support, particularly on webs and browsers. So yes, we're looking at Silverlight support. I don't have any firm dates that I can give you at this point, but we're definitely looking at it.
Thanks.
Hi, we're in the financial space, and is there any plans for Live ID to do stronger authentication or vetting processes for identifying the user through either digital certificates or other trusted authorities?
So the question was around stronger authentication for Live ID accounts. The short answer is yes, we're looking at that. We're actually placing a lot of investment in things like two-factor authentication and also policy-driven authentication. So sites can specify, as you may have heard me mention, they can specify a password policy. So maybe it has to be 9 characters long with a letter, a number, and a symbol. That's one level that we're looking at, but also two-factor authentication and things like smart cards as well, and card space we're also looking at. Again, we're trying to pull all those together and provide a consistent functionality across a whole range of options there. But we're definitely looking at it, yes.
From your presentation, I didn't just understand a small thing. Is the Microsoft Federation Gateway a SKU or is it part of Geneva?
It's both, actually. It's a collaboration between the Live ID team and the Geneva team. Under the covers, it's actually running on Geneva code, and we've provided a lot of the user experience around that. So the answer is it's both. Federation Gateway is both Geneva and Live ID.
But it is an independent SKU, or do you have to install Geneva?
The the services connector is a separate download. It's a free download.
Okay.
So you don't have to install Geneva to use that. But if you want to install Geneva, there's upgrade paths there as well. Any more questions?
So I have one more. Regarding the OpenID stuff you showed at the beginning, one thing that was strikingly very different from other OpenID providers is that you do have the ability to hide or give a temporary identifier, temporary URL. Does that URL continue to be returned the same when you return to that site, or is that different for every time you sign in?
That's a good question. So the question is, if you use the anonymous identifier option in OpenID, when does that change? The answer is that URL is generated as a combination of the user and the realm, the site realm that you're signing into. So that site, that realm will always get the same identifier for that user.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
Okay, this one's not going to be so nasty, I promise. But it seems to me that Live ID is the home for my identity, or it could be, right? Are you guys planning to offer me to host my info cards there as managed info cards in the future?
So the question is around, if I paraphrase it, it's about InfoCard integration with Live ID. We already support that. We have a beta function to allow you to link a self-issued card to your Live ID account. And then you can use that to sign into your Live ID account in place of a password. We're also looking at, on the bigger picture of what other options should we provide for around InfoCard. And some of that will be driven by a lot of the federation relationships. So for example, if you federate through the Microsoft Services Connector, an organization can issue managed info cards for all their users on that domain. Any more questions?
Can you share any of your future plans around managed domains? Are any changes coming in that space?
So the question is, what future functionality do we have around managed domains? You may not realize it, but we already have a lot of functionality there. Particularly, we host a lot of accounts for universities through our managed partnerships there. We're looking to basically integrate that. Currently, there's a slight separation between managed accounts and federated accounts. Again, we're trying to keep the same level of parity there and also the same level of functionality across our other account types. So we'd like to build more opportunity on there and make it much easier, particularly for managed and federated domains, to control their users, control what services they can access, and control what services are purchased for their users.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any final question? I'm required to tell you that you must fill in your evaluation. I will get shot if you don't. But please fill in your evaluation on MicrosoftPDC.com. Also, the sessions will be available in around about 24 hours. Thank you.